Now witness. Last week's general election in Britain put the opposition Liberal Democrats at the heart of the country's politics. But it's a century since the Liberal Party has held power outright. Andrew Whitehead looks at the sort of campaigning they were doing 100 years ago.
It's 1910, a turbulent year in British politics, 2 general elections, voters polarised by the Liberal government's plans for a land tax, and a peers versus people constitutional crisis. Liberal supporters took to the streets to rally against what they saw as privilege and reaction. And this was their campaign song.
God made the land for the people, the land.
The Land Song, recorded on gramophone fully a century ago. A disc long lost, recently rediscovered, and now probably broadcast for the first time.
God gave the land to the people.
God gave the land to the people, a refrain heard at street corner meetings, processions and campaign rallies, sung to the alarm of the police at protest gatherings in London's Parliament Square. It harks back to another era, before TV, radio and the internet became the main election battlegrounds, before universal franchise. Women didn't have the vote back in 1910. Yet the song is still sung with passion by British Liberal Democrats. Among them the historian, psephologist and activist Michael Steed.
It was the great People's Budget of 1909 when David Lloyd George sought to finance the new welfare state provisions of the national insurance system, partly through a tax on the land. That was rejected by the House of Lords, which was then stuffed full of aristocrats who owned lots of land, and he was taken to the people in the 1910 general election, and it was the great song of that election. It is also a great rousing tune, of course. It's marching through Georgia, so it has echoes of the American Civil War. It was the song of the northern troops marching through the state of Georgia to liberate the slaves.
I am one of the children of the people. I was brought up amongst them, and I know their trials and their troubles. I therefore determined in framing the budget.
The voice of the Liberal Finance Minister David Lloyd George, the Welsh wizard he was known as, speaking more than a century ago in defence of one of his most radical initiatives, taxing the value of land.
It will at last compel the great landlords to contribute to the community a fair share of that increased value of their land which the community and not their own exertions have created.
His appearance was so distinctive. In later years he had long flowing white hair and everybody could recognise a caricature of Lloyd George in an instant. In earlier years he was dapper with a lovely black moustache. He was one of the most effective orators of 20th century British politics. His radicalism, I think, sprang from a nonconformist Welshman's protest against the imposition of Anglicanism and English landlordism in Wales. It echoes a time when nonconformist religion was very strong in Britain, particularly in Wales, which of course is where Lloyd George came from, and when there was that particular link with religion and politics.
The mass campaign for a land tax, and indeed the land song, date back a generation earlier, to the United States of the 1880s. It crossed the Atlantic to become the most galvanising political anthem of its era.
I was brought up in a Liberal household down in Cornwall and Plymouth, and my father was a Liberal Member of Parliament, a radical Liberal, and he taught me the song.
Michael Foot, a left-winger and one-time leader of the Labour Party, died earlier this year. Towards the end of his long political career, he spoke of his affection for a song more associated with liberal radicalism.
Way back in the 1920s, I heard the song being sung. The Lang song was the one which really seemed to strike terror into the hearts and minds of the landlords, as it should. It's not only a land song, and it's much more than a liberal song. It's a song which summarises the democratic case.
Lloyd George's land tax was never fully implemented. The issue was pushed to the margins of British politics, and so too was the Liberal Party, as Labour rose to be the main challenger to the Conservatives. By the 1960s, the Liberals barely survived as a national force, and then a new generation of radicals, Michael Steed among them, breathed new life into the party and gave new voice to an old Liberal anthem.
It must have been back in my Oxford student days, early 60s. There was a great political sing-song tradition, mainly traditional left-wing songs of a sort of more socialist ilk, but the land song was amongst them, and that wasn't so socialist. It was classic Liberal.
The land is free for the people. The land was God who made the land.
Not only Liberals, but socialists such as Michael Foot regarded this as the best political song around.
I don't mean any insult or any derogatory remarks to the other songs. There's been some very good songs. England Arise, which was the socialist or Labour song, socialist song, was a very good song too, and in a sense that was the one that was most popular amongst the growing socialist or Labour parties at the beginning of the century. The International was a song which covered the whole world and came back to England, having travelled all round the continent.
Arise, ye starving, come your slumbers. Arise, ye criminals of war. For these are liberty born of thunders, and at last can the age of comes.
And the Red Flag too, which became more officially the Labour Party song than any other. So all of them are very good songs, but for sheer rhythm and effectiveness and for a simple democratic message, I think the land song still retains the vibrance and the rhythm that I've mentioned. It finishes up with the chorus, why should we be beggars with the ballot in our hand? God gave the land to the people.
The army now is marching on the battle to begin. The standard now is raised on high to face the battle din.
It's sung still. On the last evening of Liberal Democrat conferences, there's a late-night glee club, a raucous political sing-song. Hundreds turn up, songbooks in hand. And without fail, the glee club opens with what most present would insist is their all-time favourite.
Why should we be beggars with the ballot in our hand?
It's a link with the heyday of British liberalism. That's certainly how Michael Steed sees it, and why he still sings the land song.
I think it means a connection between past campaigns and past values and issues that are still relevant today. I think it's a great thing to revel in our tradition, because our tradition matters. We still don't have a real proper tax on land values in this country. Ownership of property is not just a right, it's a privilege, and those who own a lot of property should contribute to the community.
God who gave the land, the ground on which we stand. Why should we be beggars with the ballot in our hands?
Sentiment shared by those who sang along to this gramophone recording, which blared out at election rallies across Britain a century ago, when Liberals weren't simply potential junior partners in government, but the largest party in Parliament.
Why should we beg work and let the landlords take the best? Make them pay their taxes for the land we'll risk the rest. The land was meant for the people.
Andrew Whitehead with the land song. And if you've lived through a historic event, why not email us? It's witness@bbc.co.uk.